Dust swirled around Sheriff Jedediah Harding's boots as he surveyed the small town of Redemption. It was a fitting name, he often mused, for a place that seemed to constantly need it. Jedediah was a fixture here, as much a part of the landscape as the towering mesas in the distance. He was a man etched with the harsh lines of the desert sun and years of upholding the law. Folks respected him, not just because of the badge pinned to his worn leather vest, but because they knew he was fair. Tough, yes, but always fair. He'd seen his share of outlaws and desperados drift through Redemption, and he'd always dealt with them decisively. Jedediah believed in the law, in its power to bring order to a chaotic world. But beneath the stern gaze and the steady hand that held a cold peacemaker lay a deep well of sorrow. A past family tragedy clung to him like a persistent shadow, a constant reminder of what he'd lost. He rarely spoke of it, but the pain was always there, a dull ache in his heart. It was a wound that time hadn't healed, a missing piece of his life that could never be replaced. The townsfolk knew better than to pry. They saw the sadness in his eyes, the way he sometimes stared off into the distance, lost in memories. They understood that Sheriff Harding carried a heavy burden, one that shaped the man he was today. It made him more compassionate, perhaps, but also more determined to protect the innocent and uphold the law, no matter the cost. He wouldn't let anyone else suffer the kind of loss he had. The peace Sheriff Harding so diligently maintained was beginning to crumble. A wave of lawlessness had swept across the county, turning quiet homesteads and bustling stagecoach routes into targets for ruthless bandits. It started subtly, a few head of cattle missing here and there, dismissed as simple misfortune. But then the stagecoach robberies began, each one bolder and more violent than the last. Whispers of masked men and smoking guns echoed through the saloons and general stores. Fear, a chilling wind, began to creep into the hearts of the townsfolk. Jedediah felt the weight of his responsibility grow heavier with each new report. He spent long hours poring over maps, tracking the patterns of the crimes, trying to anticipate the outlaw's next move. He organized posses, dispatched deputies to patrol the most vulnerable areas, and offered rewards for information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. But it felt like he was chasing shadows. The bandits were always one step ahead, vanishing into the vast, unforgiving landscape. The cattle rustling intensified, crippling local ranchers who depended on their herds for survival. Families who had worked hard to build a life for themselves now faced ruin. The stagecoach robberies disrupted trade and communication, isolating Redemption and its surrounding communities. The county was teetering on the brink of chaos, and Sheriff Harding knew he had to act decisively before it was too late. He vowed to bring these criminals to justice, to restore order and security to the land he had sworn to protect. The memory of his past loss fueled his determination. He would not allow this county to suffer as he had. The whispers started like a desert breeze, barely audible, then grew into a howling wind. The name on everyone's lips was the Vipers. They were a new breed of outlaw, more brutal, more organized, and seemingly untouchable. Stories spread like wildfire, embellished with each telling, painting a picture of a gang that reveled in cruelty and left no witnesses. The Vipers were a plague on the land, and their venom was spreading fast. Unlike the petty thieves and desperate drifters Jedediah had dealt with before, the Vipers operated with a chilling precision. They planned their heists meticulously, striking swiftly and disappearing without a trace. Their leader, known only as Viper, was shrouded in mystery. Some said he was a former gunslinger, hardened by years of violence. Others claimed he was a disgruntled rancher, seeking revenge against the wealthy landowners. Still others whispered that he was a demon in disguise, sent to test the faith of good people. Whatever the truth, the rumors painted Viper as a man of exceptional cunning and ruthlessness. He was said to be a master strategist, able to anticipate his enemy's every move. He inspired fear and loyalty in his gang, and his word was law. The very mention of his name was enough to send shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned cowboys. The Vipers were more than just a gang of outlaws. They were a symbol of the growing darkness that threatened to engulf redemption and everything Sheriff Harding held dear. He knew that bringing them down would be his greatest challenge yet. The name of the town was Harmony, a peaceful settlement nestled in a fertile valley, known for its orchards and friendly folk. It was a place where doors were left unlocked and neighbors helped neighbors. That innocence was shattered in a single, brutal night. The Vipers descended upon Harmony like a swarm of locusts, their arrival heralded by the thunder of hooves and the crackle of gunfire. They stormed through the town, looting stores, robbing homes, and terrorizing the residents. The small, volunteer militia stood little chance against the Vipers' superior firepower and ruthless tactics. Buildings were set ablaze, casting an eerie glow across the terrified faces of the townsfolk. The screams of the injured and the weeping of the bereaved filled the air. By the time the sun rose, Harmony was a smoldering ruin, its spirit broken, its future uncertain. News of the massacre reached Redemption like a punch to the gut. Sheriff Harding felt a surge of anger and grief. This was no longer just about cattle rustling or stagecoach robberies. This was an act of pure, unadulterated evil. He saddled his horse, gathered his deputies, and rode towards Harmony, his heart heavy with dread. As he surveyed the devastation, the bodies lying in the streets, the smoke still rising from the charred remains of homes, a steely resolve hardened within him. He vowed, right then and there, to hunt down the Vipers and bring them to justice, no matter the cost. Harmony would not be forgotten. Their brutality would not go unpunished. This was personal now. The investigation into the Harmony massacre began amidst the ashes and sorrow. Sheriff Harding, his face grim, led his deputies through the devastated town, meticulously searching for any clues the Vipers might have left behind. They interviewed survivors, piecing together fragmented accounts of the attack, trying to glean any information that could help them identify the perpetrators. The task was daunting. Many of the witnesses were traumatized, their memories blurred by fear and shock. Others were too grief-stricken to speak. But slowly, painstakingly, a picture began to emerge. Descriptions of the Vipers' clothing, their horses, their weapons, and their mannerisms were collected and compared. A few survivors recalled specific details: a distinctive scar on a bandit's face, a silver ring worn on another's hand, a particular brand on a horse. The deputies fanned out across the county, following every lead, no matter how tenuous. They tracked the Vipers' movements, tracing their path through the rugged terrain, searching for signs of their passage. They examined discarded campsites, analyzed footprints, and scrutinized every piece of evidence they could find. Sheriff Harding, meanwhile, focused on identifying Viper himself. He knew that capturing the leader was the key to dismantling the entire gang. He spent hours poring over old wanted posters, studying criminal records, and consulting with informants, hoping to find a connection, a clue, anything that could reveal Viper's true identity. The hunt had begun, and Jedediah Harding would not rest until justice was served. The ghosts of Harmony demanded it. Days turned into weeks, the investigation yielding little more than dead ends and frustrating inconsistencies. Just as Sheriff Harding began to despair, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young girl, orphaned in the Harmony attack, approached him, clutching a small, tarnished locket. She said she had found it near the body of her mother, and she remembered seeing a man wearing it earlier that day, a man who looked like one of the Vipers. The locket was plain, almost unremarkable, but as Jedediah turned it over in his calloused hands, a chill ran down his spine. It was a locket he had given to his wife, Sarah, years ago. Sarah and Caleb. Another clue surfaced around the same time. A deputy, returning from questioning a witness in a neighboring town, reported that a survivor of a stagecoach robbery described the Viper leader as having a distinctive scar above his left eye, a scar shaped like a crescent moon. The deputy didn't think much of it, but Sheriff Harding did. Caleb had fallen from a tree when he was a boy, and the accident left him with just such a scar. The pieces were starting to fit together. forming a horrifying picture in Jedediah's mind. The locket, the scar, could it be possible? Could Viper, the ruthless leader of the most brutal gang in the territory, be his son, Caleb? The thought was almost too much to bear. He pushed it away, telling himself it was just a coincidence, a cruel twist of fate. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted, and it was beginning to take root. The familiar face was emerging from the shadows, and Jedediah Harding feared what he would find. The seed of doubt that had been planted in Jedediah's mind began to sprout, twisting and contorting into a horrifying reality. He couldn't ignore the evidence any longer. He needed proof, something concrete to either confirm his worst fears or finally lay them to rest. He decided to revisit the site of Viper's most recent hideout, a remote cabin nestled deep within the canyons. Under the pretense of searching for more evidence, Jedediah meticulously combed through the debris. He found old letters, scraps of maps, and discarded equipment. Then, tucked away in a hidden compartment beneath a floorboard, he found it, a small, worn photograph. It was a picture of Sarah, his wife, holding a young boy in her arms. The boy was smiling, his eyes full of mischief, and above his left eye, a faint crescent-shaped scar was clearly visible. It was Caleb. The photograph was undeniable proof. Viper, the ruthless outlaw who had terrorized the county and murdered innocent people, was his son, Caleb, whom he had long believed to be dead. The news struck Jedediah like a physical blow, leaving him breathless and reeling. Years ago, after Sarah's death, Caleb had run away, presumed lost in a river accident. Jedediah had mourned him, buried the hope of ever seeing him again. Now, he discovered that Caleb wasn't dead, but twisted, corrupted, and leading a life of violence and crime. The weight of this revelation threatened to crush him. Justice and blood were about to collide in the most devastating way imaginable. The photograph blurred as tears welled in Jedediah's eyes. He sank onto a crate, the weight of the past crashing down on him. Suddenly, he was no longer the hardened sheriff, but a grieving father reliving the most painful moments of his life. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Flashback. Sarah's laughter echoed through their small ranch house, a sound that always filled Jedediah's heart with joy. Caleb, a rambunctious boy of 10, chased their dog, Buster, around the yard. Life wasn't easy, but it was good. Then, the fever came. It swept through the town like a wildfire, claiming Sarah in its merciless embrace. Jedediah was devastated, lost in a sea of grief. He tried to be strong for Caleb, but he was drowning in his own sorrow. One day, Caleb, trying to help, accidentally broke Sarah's favorite vase. Jedediah, consumed by grief and exhaustion, lashed out, saying things he immediately regretted. He accused Caleb of being careless, of not appreciating what they had. Caleb, hurt and confused, ran away. Jedediah searched for him for days, but Caleb was gone. Eventually, he found Caleb's hat near the river and assumed the worst. He never stopped blaming himself. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In flashback, the memory was a knife twisting in Jedediah's gut. He had pushed Caleb away, driven him into the wilderness with harsh words and unspoken grief. Had his actions set Caleb on this path of destruction? Was he responsible for the man Caleb had become? The questions swirled in his mind, adding another layer of torment to his already burdened soul. He had to find Caleb, not just to bring him to justice, but to understand what had happened, to somehow make amends for the mistakes of the past. Jedediah stood at a crossroads, his heart torn in two. The law was clear. Viper, regardless of his identity, was a criminal who needed to be brought to justice. He had sworn an oath to protect the innocent, to uphold the law, and to punish those who broke it. But how could he arrest his own son? How could he condemn Caleb to a life behind bars, or worse, to the gallows? The conflict raged within him like a wildfire. One part of him, the sheriff, demanded that he do his duty, that he set aside his personal feelings and bring Viper to justice. The other part, the father, pleaded with him to find a way to save Caleb, to redeem him, to give him his second chance. He paced back and forth in his office, the photograph of Sarah and Caleb lying on his desk like a silent accusation. He thought of the victims of the Vipers, the families who had lost loved ones, the towns that had been terrorized. He thought of Harmony, a smoldering reminder of Caleb's brutality. Could he turn a blind eye to such suffering simply because the perpetrator was his son? Sleep offered no escape. He tossed and turned, haunted by nightmares of Caleb, both as the innocent boy he once knew and as the ruthless viper he had become. He saw Sarah, her eyes filled with sorrow, asking him to choose between his duty and his family. The decision was agonizing, a burden almost too heavy to bear. He knew that whatever he chose, it would change him forever. The line between justice and blood had blurred, and Jedediah Harding was caught in the middle. Driven by a desperate hope, Jedediah decided to reach out to Caleb, to make one last attempt to save his son from the path he had chosen. He couldn't simply arrest him. He had to try to reason with him, to appeal to whatever goodness might still remain within the hardened outlaw. He enlisted the help of an old friend, a Native American tracker named Two Hawks, who had known Caleb as a boy. Two Hawks agreed to deliver a message, a plea from a father to his lost son. The message was simple but heartfelt. Jedediah wrote of his love for Caleb, his regret for the mistakes of the past, and his belief that it was never too late to change. He begged Caleb to surrender, to turn himself in, to face the consequences of his actions. He promised to stand by him, to support him, and to help him find a new path. He wrote of Sarah, reminding Caleb of the values she had instilled in them both. He signed the letter simply Dad. Days passed, each one an eternity. Jedediah waited anxiously for Two Hawks to return, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread. He knew that Caleb could reject his plea, that he might be too far gone to be saved. But he had to try. He owed it to Caleb, to Sarah, and to the victims of the Vipers. He clung to the hope that somewhere, deep down, the boy he had lost still existed, and that he could be reached. He prayed for a miracle, a chance to mend the broken bond between father and son. The fate of Caleb, and perhaps of Jedediah himself, hung in the balance. Against all odds, Caleb agreed to meet. Two Hawks returned with a single word: tomorrow, noon, Widow's Peak. Jedediah's heart leaped with a mixture of hope and trepidation. He knew this meeting could be his last chance to reach Caleb, but it could also be a trap. The next day dawned cold and gray, mirroring the storm brewing inside Jedediah. He rode to Widow's Peak alone, leaving his deputies behind. He wanted this to be a private conversation, a father-son reconciliation, if such a thing were even possible. As he approached the meeting place, he saw Caleb standing on the edge of the cliff, silhouetted against the skyline. He was flanked by two of his Vipers, their faces grim and their hands resting on their guns. The air crackled with tension. Jedediah dismounted, his hand hovering near his own weapon. He could see the years etched on Caleb's face, the hardness in his eyes, the crescent-shaped scar that served as a constant reminder of their shared past. "Caleb," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Caleb turned, his gaze cold and assessing. "Sheriff," he replied, the word dripping with sarcasm. "Or should I call you Dad?" The meeting had begun, but it was clear that the road to redemption would be long and fraught with peril. The years of separation, the weight of their past, and the crimes that Caleb had committed hung heavy in the air, a barrier of distrust that seemed almost insurmountable. "Dad," Caleb spat the word like a curse. "Don't pretend you care now. Where were you when I needed you?" He gestured around him at the desolate landscape. "This is what you made me. You and your precious law." Jedediah's heart ached. "Caleb, I searched for you. I thought you were dead." Caleb finished, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "That's what you wanted to believe, wasn't it? Easier than facing the truth, that you drove me away." He stepped closer, his eyes blazing with anger. "You think I wanted this life? I didn't have a choice. After I left, I was alone, starving. The world doesn't care about orphans, Sheriff. Only the strong survive." He explained how he fell in with a group of drifters, outcasts who had been wronged by the system, abandoned by society. They taught him how to survive, how to fight, how to take what he needed. The law protects the rich, the powerful, Caleb said, his voice rising. It ignores the poor, the forgotten. I'm just evening the score. He spoke of corrupt officials, greedy landowners, and the injustices he had witnessed. He painted a picture of a world where the law was a tool of oppression, and where the only way to fight back was to break it. Harmony, Jedediah began, but Caleb cut him off. They were warned, he said coldly. They sided with the wrong people. Jedediah realized with a sinking heart that Caleb truly believed he was justified, that he saw himself not as a criminal, but as a revolutionary. The chasm between them seemed wider than ever. Jedediah listened to Caleb's justifications, his heart breaking with each word. He understood the pain, the anger, the sense of abandonment that had driven Caleb down this dark path. But he couldn't condone his actions. He couldn't ignore the suffering he had caused. "Caleb," he said, his voice firm despite the turmoil within him. "It's not too late. You can still change. Surrender. Face the law. I'll be there for you every step of the way." He extended his hand, offering a chance at redemption. "Let's put an end to this, son." Caleb stared at his father's outstretched hand, his expression conflicted. For a moment, Jedediah thought he might actually reach for it. But then, Caleb's eyes hardened, and he shook his head. "It's too late for me, Dad," he said, his voice cold and final. "I can't go back. These men," he gestured to his vipers, "they're my family now. I can't abandon them." He turned away, his back to Jedediah. "I made my choice a long time ago. You made yours today?" He paused, then added, without turning around, "Don't come after me, Sheriff. I don't want to hurt you." With that, he and his vipers mounted their horses and rode away, disappearing into the canyons. Jedediah stood alone on Widow's Peak, his outstretched hand still hanging in the air, his heart shattered. He had given Caleb one last chance, and Caleb had refused, choosing his gang, his path, his destiny. The die was cast. The final showdown was inevitable. The hunt for the vipers intensified, Jedediah driven by a grim determination. He knew this confrontation was unavoidable, and he prepared himself for the battle, steeling his resolve and pushing aside the pain that threatened to overwhelm him. He gathered his posse, a group of loyal deputies and brave townsfolk, and they tracked the vipers to a remote canyon, a natural fortress that offered the outlaws a distinct advantage. As the posse approached the canyon, the air grew thick with anticipation. The vipers were waiting, their rifles trained on the narrow entrance. The sun beat down mercilessly, adding to the oppressive tension. Jedediah, his face etched with sorrow and determination, rode to the front of the posse. He raised his hand, signaling them to halt. "Caleb," he shouted, his voice echoing through the canyon. "This doesn't have to end like this. Let your men go. Face the law." Caleb appeared on a rocky outcrop, his face grim, his rifle in hand. "It's too late for talk, Dad," he shouted back. "This is the only way it ends." A shot rang out, shattering the silence. The final showdown had begun. The canyon erupted in gunfire, the air filled with the crackle of rifles and the acrid smell of gunpowder. The posse and the vipers exchanged fire, each side determined to prevail. Jedediah fought with a ferocity born of desperation, his every shot aimed with deadly precision. He wasn't just fighting for justice, he was fighting for his son's soul. The battle raged on, both sides taking heavy losses. Jedediah fought his way through the canyon, his eyes searching for Caleb. He saw him pinned down behind a rock, exchanging fire with two of his deputies. Suddenly, one of the vipers flanking Caleb was shot, leaving Caleb exposed. At the same moment, Jedediah saw one of his deputies, young Billy, leveling his rifle at Caleb, a clear shot lined up. Billy had lost his father in the Harmony massacre, and his eyes were filled with righteous fury. Jedediah knew that if Billy fired, Caleb would be dead. But if he intervened, he risked Billy's life and potentially the lives of others. He had only a split second to decide. He could uphold the law, allow Billy to take a shot, and bring Viper to justice, avenging the victims of his crimes. Or he could save his son, potentially allowing him to escape and continue his reign of terror. The weight of the decision was crushing, the choice impossible. With a surge of adrenaline, Jedediah acted. He dove in front of Billy, knocking his rifle off target just as he fired. The bullet whizzed past Caleb, narrowly missing him. Billy stared at Jedediah in disbelief, his face a mask of anger and confusion. "Sheriff, what did you do?" he cried. Jedediah knew he had just made the most difficult choice of his life, a choice that would forever define him. But had he saved his son or condemned them both? Chaos erupted. The Vipers, seeing their leader spared, unleashed a renewed barrage of gunfire. Billy, enraged and confused, wrestled with Jedediah, trying to understand his actions. In the confusion, Caleb seized his chance. He emerged from behind the rock, not to escape, but to protect his father. He saw one of his own Vipers, a man named Snake, aiming at Jedediah. Without hesitation, Caleb threw himself in front of his father, taking the bullet meant for him. He crumpled to the ground, clutching his chest. The gunfire ceased. A hush fell over the canyon. Jedediah rushed to Caleb's side, cradling him in his arms. "Caleb, no!" he cried, tears streaming down his face. Caleb looked up at his father, a faint smile on his lips. I guess. I'm not too far gone," he whispered, his voice weak. He reached up and touched the scar above his eye, a reminder of their shared past. Tell Sarah, I'm sorry." With those words, Caleb's eyes closed, and he drew his last breath. Jedediah held his son close, his heart shattered beyond repair. The Vipers, stunned by Caleb's sacrifice, surrendered. The battle was over. Jedediah had saved his son, but only in death. Caleb had found redemption, not by changing his ways, but by making the ultimate sacrifice for his father. Jedediah had upheld the law, but at the cost of his own heart. The canyon was silent, save for the sheriff's anguished sobs, a testament to the devastating consequences of justice and blood. The county was safe. The Vipers were no more. Harmony could begin to rebuild, and redemption could breathe a sigh of relief. But for Jedediah Harding, there was no relief, no victory. The triumph was hollow, the price too high. He had upheld the law, but what cost? He had lost his son, not to the wilderness as he had long believed, but to a life of violence and crime, and ultimately to a bullet meant for him. He returned to redemption a changed man. The lines on his face were deeper, his eyes more weary. The joy that had once flickered within him was extinguished, replaced by a profound sorrow. He still wore the badge, still patrolled the streets, still upheld the law, but his heart was heavy, his soul scarred. Billy, though initially angry, eventually understood Jedediah's actions. He saw the pain in the sheriff's eyes, the burden he carried. But the other townsfolk, while grateful for their safety, looked at Jedediah differently. They knew he had saved his son, even if only for a moment, and that knowledge cast a shadow over his reputation. Jedediah lived with the consequences of his choices every day. He carried the guilt of his past actions, the regret of his harsh words, the knowledge that he had played a role in Caleb's downfall. He also carried the memory of Caleb's final act of redemption, a flicker of hope in the darkness. He knew he would never truly be free from the pain, but he also knew he had to keep going to honor Caleb's memory by continuing to serve and protect the community he had sworn to uphold. The county was safe, but Jedediah Harding was forever haunted. Months turned into years. Jedediah continued to serve as sheriff, his dedication unwavering, but his spirit forever tempered by the events in that desolate canyon. He often visited Caleb's grave, a simple wooden cross on a windswept hill overlooking redemption. He would stand there for hours, contemplating the complexities of justice, family, and redemption. He wondered if he could have done things differently, if he could have saved Caleb from his chosen path. He questioned whether his own actions, his own grief, had inadvertently led his son to ruin. He pondered the meaning of the law, its power to bring order, but also its limitations in the face of human suffering. He realized that justice was not always black and white, that morality was often a tangled web of gray. He had upheld the law, but he had also lost his son. He had protected his community, but he had also broken his own heart. Yet, amidst the sorrow, there was a flicker of hope. Caleb's final act of sacrifice, his willingness to give his life to save his father, suggested that even in the darkest of souls, there was still a capacity for good. Perhaps, Jedediah thought, redemption was not always about changing one's ways, but about finding a moment of grace, a single act of selflessness that could atone for a lifetime of mistakes. The story of Sheriff Jedediah Harding and his son, the Viper, became a legend in redemption, a cautionary tale about the complexities of family, the burdens of the law, and the enduring power of love and sacrifice. It was a bittersweet story, a reminder that even in the wild and unforgiving West, morality was never simple, and that even the most hardened hearts could find a path to redemption, however tragic. Jedediah continued to watch over redemption, a sentinel against the darkness, forever marked by the son he lost and the justice he upheld. The sun set on redemption, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, a promise of a new day, but also a reminder of the shadows that would always linger.